The unexpected meeting. Marcus had nowhere to go. He stood outside the large, towering apartment building, his heart pounding in his chest. The city lights flickered in the distance, but all he could focus on was the envelope in his hand. The letter of eviction. His landlord had given him 1 week to leave, and his bank account was as empty as his hope. He wasn't sure what had brought him here. The building had always been an eyesore to him, huge, dark, and filled with strange, exotic tenants who looked nothing like humans. But tonight, he had no choice. The rent was low, and he needed a roof over his head, no matter how unusual the place seemed. Marcus looked up at the sign that hung above the door, Zyra's Apartments. He had heard rumors about Zyra. Some said she was an alien. Others claimed she was a powerful, dangerous figure who could control the weather. But the truth, nobody knew. It didn't matter now. He was desperate, and this was his only chance. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Inside, the air smelled strange, like a mixture of flowers and something metallic. The walls were decorated with glowing symbols, and the soft hum of strange music played in the background. He stepped inside, unsure if he was walking into a dream or a nightmare. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed the receptionist's desk was empty. But there was a sign that read, "Please wait. Zyra will be with you shortly." He didn't know if he was supposed to wait or leave, but before he could make up his mind, a door on the far side of the lobby opened. Out stepped a tall, alien woman. She was unlike anyone Marcus had ever seen. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her hair long and flowing like liquid silver, and her eyes were a vibrant shade of green, glowing faintly in the dim light. She wore a simple outfit, but there was something commanding about her presence. It was as if the air around her bent to her will. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft but strong, with an accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. It wasn't harsh like some alien languages he had heard before. It was warm, almost inviting. Marcus froze for a moment. His mind raced as he tried to process the fact that he was face to face with an actual alien. But his instincts told him to act normal, to not show any fear. He didn't have time to be afraid. Hi. I'm Marcus. I'm looking for a place to stay. I saw your ad." His voice sounded shakier than he wanted it to, but Zyra didn't seem to notice. Zyra studied him for a moment, her glowing eyes scanning him up and down. There was something about her gaze that made Marcus feel both uneasy and strangely comforted at the same time. It was as if she could read him, understand him in ways he couldn't even comprehend. "I see," she said finally, her voice calm. "You're in need of a room then?" "Yeah," Marcus replied, feeling a bit more confident. I need something cheap. I don't have a lot of money. I've been kicked out of my place." Zyra's expression softened, though it was still unreadable. "I understand. I offer a special rate for certain individuals. Would you like to see the apartment?" Marcus hesitated. A part of him felt that something was off. He had heard about Zyra's Apartments, how people who moved in seemed to disappear, or worse, never quite came out the same. But the desperation in his chest was louder than the voice of caution in his mind. "Sure," he said, his voice firm now. "I'll take a look." Zyra gave a small nod and turned, motioning for him to follow. Marcus followed her down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing in the quiet building. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the entire structure was alive. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched from every direction, but when he glanced around, there was no one else in sight. They stopped in front of a door that looked just like the others, plain, gray, with a small number etched into the frame. "This is it," Zyra said, her voice quieter now. "The rent is minimal. I trust that you will pay on time." Marcus nodded eagerly, relieved to hear that. "I will. I promise." Zyra's eyes lingered on him for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Then, without another word, she unlocked the door and stepped aside to let him enter. The room was small, but it was clean and well kept. A simple bed, a chair, and a small table were the only furniture inside. The walls were decorated with more of those glowing symbols, and there was a window with a beautiful view of the city lights outside. "It's nice," Marcus said, looking around. He didn't care that it wasn't fancy. It was more than he had hoped for. "I believe you'll find it suitable," Zyra said, her voice soft again. "But remember, Marcus, the price for this apartment comes with certain expectations." Marcus frowned, confused. Expectations? Zyra's gaze was sharp as she looked at him. "I expect you to follow the rules of this place, and more importantly, I expect you to be someone of interest." Marcus blinked. "What does that mean?" Zyra smiled faintly, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile that made him feel like he was part of a much bigger story than he had imagined. "You'll understand soon enough." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Marcus standing there, unsure of what he had just agreed to. The unlikely agreement. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as the alien woman stepped into the room. Her skin shimmered with a soft, iridescent glow, like the moonlight reflecting off water. Her eyes were a striking shade of violet, large and almost hypnotic, fixed directly on him. She wasn't human, that was for sure, but there was something oddly comforting about her presence. Her face, though otherworldly, carried an expression of warmth, not danger. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth, but with an unfamiliar accent. "I am Zyra. You must be Marcus." Marcus nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, I'm Marcus. I saw your ad for the apartment. I need a place to stay." Zyra smiled slightly, tilting her head. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her shoulders, almost as if it moved on its own accord. She crossed the room toward him, her movements graceful and deliberate, like a predator that wasn't in a hurry to pounce, but was fully aware of its strength. "I know why you are here," she said, stopping just a few feet away. "You need a place to live, and you have no other options. The city is harsh to those who fall behind." Marcus swallowed hard, unsure whether it was the way she said the words or the way her gaze seemed to pierce through him. It was as if she knew everything about him. The eviction notice, his debt, his failed attempts to find another job. He suddenly felt vulnerable, as though she could read his every thought. I do," Marcus stammered. "I'm in a tough spot. I don't have much, but I'll pay what I can." Zyra's smile widened, and she took a step back. "Money is not an issue. The rent is affordable. But there is something more." Marcus blinked, confused. "What do you mean? You mean you don't want rent?" Zyra's eyes narrowed just slightly, a knowing glint flashing in them. "Rent is not why I opened these apartments, Marcus. It's not why I came to this planet either." Marcus didn't understand. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, his survival instincts warning him that this wasn't as simple as it seemed. His mind raced through the possibilities. Could she be part of some weird alien experiment? Was she trying to manipulate him? Or worse, was she about to sell him to some otherworldly collector? His fingers curled into fists. But Zyra seemed to sense his growing unease. She held up a hand, her fingers delicate and almost translucent in the dim light. "Relax," she said softly. "I do not want anything from you that you cannot offer willingly." "Then, what do you want?" Marcus asked cautiously. Zyra's violet eyes softened, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of something, regret perhaps. Loneliness. The expression passed quickly, replaced by the calm, almost regal demeanor she had shown before. "I need a partner, Marcus. Not just for business, but for companionship. Someone who will share their life with me, as equals. In return, I offer shelter, safety, and something more." She paused, as though considering her next words carefully. "You will have a place to stay. No questions asked. And I will help you get back on your feet. But I ask for one thing in return." Marcus frowned. "What's the catch?" "The catch," Zyra repeated, her voice tinged with amusement. "I think you misunderstand. It's not a catch. I simply want something I can't buy." Her gaze held his for a long moment. Time. The time to understand this world. The time to learn about your people. The time to live beyond the walls of this building. And in return, I offer a kind of partnership. A partnership, Marcus repeated, his voice edged with doubt. "You're asking for a relationship." Zira's smile was gentle, but there was an unmistakable sincerity in her tone. Not a typical one, but yes, a partnership. I am not human, and I do not expect human rules to apply. But what I offer is simple: stability. In exchange for your companionship, I promise to help you, guide you, and provide you with what you need. I've seen the way your world works. It is difficult for those who don't fit the mold. Marcus blinked, trying to wrap his mind around her words. Could this alien really be offering him a deal he couldn't refuse? Or was this some kind of trap? I don't understand, he admitted. You're offering me a place to stay, but you want me to be your partner. Zira's eyes softened further. I know it sounds strange, but in my kind's culture, partnerships are not always romantic. They are mutual. You would stay here, and we would learn about each other's worlds. You would not need to worry about your finances or living arrangements. In exchange, you would share your experiences, your knowledge, and perhaps your company. Marcus stared at her, unsure whether to be scared or intrigued. A part of him screamed to run, to find a safer place, but another part of him, the one that had been struggling for so long, felt the temptation of her offer. Free rent, a place to stay, and strangely, something else, something he couldn't quite identify. I don't know, he said, his voice unsure. It just doesn't feel right. What do you really want from me, Zira? Zira's expression softened again, and for a moment, Marcus thought he saw vulnerability in her eyes, something beyond her alien calm. What I want, Marcus, is something that both of us need. A chance to connect, to understand, and perhaps, if time allows, more. There it was again. The odd mix of sincerity and something unspoken. Marcus wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the alien's otherworldly nature or his own desperation. But something told him that this offer was more than it appeared. I need to think about it, Marcus said, his voice hesitant. Zira nodded, but there was no disappointment in her expression. Of course. Take your time. But know this, Marcus. The door will always be open to you, as it always has been. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the lobby, his mind swirling with questions. Strange roommates. Marcus had been in the apartment for 2 days now, and nothing about the place felt normal. At first, he'd been relieved. The rent was ridiculously low, and Zira had been kind, almost too kind. She'd given him a tour of the place and assured him that there were no strange rules. But the longer he stayed, the more he realized that this was no ordinary apartment, and Zira was no ordinary landlady. The first thing that struck him was the apartment itself. It didn't make sense. The rooms were far larger than they should have been, as if the space expanded beyond what the building's exterior suggested. When Marcus had entered his room, it was small at first glance, barely enough space for a bed and a desk. But the moment he stepped inside, it seemed to grow around him. The walls shifted slightly, and the floor extended beneath his feet, as if the room had been waiting for him. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination running wild. But the more time he spent there, the stranger things became. The second night, he noticed a soft humming sound, faint but constant, coming from the walls. It wasn't like the usual noises of a building settling. This sound had rhythm, like a heartbeat. He could feel it in the floor beneath him, vibrating gently through his feet as he moved around. When he'd asked Zira about it, she just smiled and said it was a part of the building's system, though she didn't offer any further explanation. That night, he heard it more clearly, And this time, the sound seemed to pulse in waves, almost like a message, but in a language he didn't understand. It made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Despite the oddities, he couldn't deny the feeling of safety that washed over him when he was inside. It was as if the apartment had accepted him. No judgment, no harshness. But Zira, his mysterious landlady, was a different story. He hadn't seen much of her, except for brief interactions in the hallways. She would leave small, odd gifts outside his door, strange fruits that he'd never seen before, glowing crystals, and even what appeared to be tiny mechanical devices that whirred quietly in his hand before vanishing into thin air. Whenever he questioned her about them, she only gave cryptic answers. Some things are better not explained, she'd say with a knowing smile, her violet eyes twinkling. But today, something was different. Marcus had returned from a long day of searching for work, another failed attempt at landing a job, and found his apartment door ajar. His stomach twisted with unease. It wasn't like him to forget to lock the door, but that's not what bothered him. It was the sense that something, or someone, was inside. Cautiously, he pushed the door open. The room looked exactly as it had when he'd left. Everything in its place. Yet there was a subtle change in the air. An electric, almost magnetic feeling that he couldn't shake. As if the very atmosphere around him had shifted. He took a few steps forward, scanning the room. His eyes paused on a small table beside the window, where a glowing blue sphere sat. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, just as he had felt it in the walls. But this time, it was tangible, right in front of him. The moment he reached for it, the room seemed to darken for a split second, and a faint whisper filled his ears. "Do not touch that," a voice murmured from behind him. Marcus spun around. Zira stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. Her violet eyes glowed faintly, and her silver hair floated around her, moving as if it had a life of its own. She wasn't just standing there. She was somehow different. The air around her seemed charged, like a storm ready to break. "Why did you leave the door open?" Marcus asked, trying to hide the unease in his voice. "And what is this? What's going on here?" Zira stepped inside the room slowly, closing the door behind her. The atmosphere grew heavier, more intense, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. "You've felt it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying an underlying power. "The way the apartment shifts around you. The way it responds to your presence. It is not a normal building, Marcus, and I am not a normal landlady." Marcus's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as though she was measuring his every thought. "This apartment is alive. It's connected to me. And now, to you. This place chooses its residents, and you have been chosen." A cold chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Chosen? For what?" Zira's gaze softened, her expression almost melancholic. "For now, all you need to know is this. The apartment will keep you safe, but you must be careful. Not all who enter here are welcome. There are forces beyond this building that will try to take what is mine." Marcus didn't know whether to run or stay. Everything about Zira, about the apartment, was so far outside his understanding that he was beginning to question whether he was still in the real world. Yet, for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to leave. The pull was too strong. Zira's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You're not as afraid as you should be. Good. It means you might be the one I've been waiting for." As she spoke, Marcus noticed something strange. The glowing blue sphere on the table began to hum louder, vibrating as if it was alive. It was only then that he realized the true weight of her words and just how deep he was in. Unspoken words. Marcus was starting to feel like he was losing touch with reality. It had only been 3 days, but every moment felt like a strange dream that he couldn't quite wake up from. The apartment, with its constantly shifting walls and strange humming sound, seemed to have a life of its own. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The building was alive. And Zira, she was something else entirely. Each day, she became more mysterious. She'd stop by his room occasionally, bringing him strange but delicious meals that seemed to shift flavors depending on his mood. At first, he thought it was just coincidence. But soon, he realized that each meal catered to his emotions. On days when he was anxious, the food was light, calming, and rich with flavor. On days when he felt anger or frustration building up, the food was spicier, almost as if it was teasing the emotions he couldn't control. What was most unsettling was the way Zara seemed to know exactly what he needed. She never asked him directly, and yet she always seemed to have the answers. Her ability to anticipate his thoughts felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The strangest thing of all, however, was the subtle, unspoken connection between them. There were moments when Marcus would catch her watching him, her violet eyes focused intently on him as if she could see straight through his facade. And when he would glance back, she'd smile, but there was a sadness behind her smile that he couldn't understand. One evening, as he sat in the living room trying to relax, Zara walked in, her eyes glimmering with a strange intensity. Her long silver hair flowed around her like liquid, making her seem almost ethereal. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him with a look that seemed to carry a weight of unspoken words. Marcus felt the tension grow. He didn't want to ask, but he couldn't help himself. "Zara, what's going on here? This place, it's not just a normal apartment building, is it?" Her eyes softened, but she didn't look away. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice quieter than usual. "No, Marcus, it's not just an apartment. And I'm not just a landlady." He felt his heart race. Her words hung in the air like a quiet storm, and he could sense that she was about to say something that would change everything. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath and sat down across from him, her eyes never leaving his. "This building, it's part of something much bigger than you or me. It's a bridge between worlds." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And I'm not just searching for a roommate, Marcus. I'm searching for a partner." Marcus blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. A partner? Was she talking about something romantic? No, it couldn't be. He wasn't even sure if she was human. She must have seen the confusion in his eyes, because she quickly added, "Not in the way you think. I'm looking for someone to help me. Someone who understands this place. This connection. The building, the food, the feeling you get when you're here. Marcus, it's not just coincidence. It's fate." "Fate," he echoed, still struggling to wrap his mind around her words. Zara nodded. "Yes. You've been chosen, Marcus. Chosen for a purpose." His heart thudded in his chest. Chosen for what? She stood up slowly, her gaze steady and serious. "To help me protect this bridge. To help me understand why this place is calling us. Why it's so alive. And more importantly, why the others are starting to notice." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. The others? Before he could respond, the soft humming sound from the walls grew louder, more intense. It was as if the building itself was reacting to Zara's words. The walls seemed to pulse, vibrating with energy that was almost too much to handle. The floor beneath him felt like it was moving, shifting with the rhythm of the hum. He looked up at Zara, his eyes wide with panic. "What's happening?" Zara's expression remained calm, but there was a tension in her features. "They're here. It's starting." Just then, the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped. Marcus's breath came out in a visible puff of air. He stared at Zara, his heart racing. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just taken a turn that would lead him into something far bigger than he could have imagined. The apartment wasn't just a place to stay anymore. It was a battleground. And he was no longer just a tenant. He was part of something much larger than himself. The secrets beneath. The tension between Marcus and Zara had reached a boiling point, and it was only a matter of time before something broke, something deep and hidden beneath the surface. Zara's presence had started to feel heavier, almost like an unseen force in the apartment. Every time she was near, Marcus could feel the pull of her attention, like gravity itself was being manipulated around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding back something crucial, a secret that, if revealed, would change everything. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring out at the glowing city skyline through the strange, translucent windows. It wasn't a typical view of Earth's cityscape. Instead, the stars glimmered unnaturally close, as if the fabric of space itself had been bent to give him a glimpse of something beyond. For a moment, he wondered if Zyra's world was even bound by the same rules as his own. The soft hum of the apartment continued in the background, almost like a lullaby. But tonight, it felt different, more insistent, as though it was trying to tell him something. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push the growing sense of unease aside. Maybe it was just the stress getting to him. Zyra appeared in the doorway, as silent as ever. She was dressed in a deep blue robe that shimmered with an otherworldly pattern, and her violet eyes gleamed, as if there was something on the tip of her tongue she wanted to say, but was holding back. "Is something wrong?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking the silence. He didn't mean to sound so blunt, but the curiosity had been eating at him for days now. Zyra studied him for a moment, her gaze intense and unreadable. Then, without a word, she walked closer to him. The air seemed to thicken around them as she neared, and Marcus could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on him. She sat beside him on the bed, not saying a word. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. Finally, Zyra broke the silence. "I have not been completely honest with you, Marcus," she said softly, her voice low and almost regretful. "There is more to this apartment than you realize. More to me than you understand." Marcus blinked, his heart racing. His mind scrambled to process the words. "What do you mean?" he asked, though part of him was already afraid of the answer. Zyra took a deep breath, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of his hand. "This place, this building, it was not always what it seems. I am not just a landlady, and I am not from this world. I am something older, something much older than you could imagine. I am bound to this place in ways that cannot be easily explained. And you," she paused, her eyes darkening, "you are the key to something I have been waiting for." The room seemed to grow colder, and Marcus shivered involuntarily. The air was electric, charged with an unseen force. He opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. Zyra's eyes locked onto his, and he could swear he saw something flicker behind them. Something ancient, something powerful. "You must understand," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "I did not bring you here by accident. The moment you stepped through that door, I knew that you were the one." Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wanted to stand up, to leave, but his body felt paralyzed, as if the apartment itself was holding him in place. His pulse quickened, and he felt the air around him grow thicker, more suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The same hum he had been hearing, now louder, almost vibrating beneath his skin. "Waiting for me. For what?" he managed to croak, his voice barely above a whisper. Zyra's expression softened, and she seemed to hesitate for a moment, as though weighing the decision to tell him everything. Then, with a faint sigh, she spoke again. "The apartment is a doorway, a gateway, if you will, and I have been bound to it for centuries, protecting it, waiting for the one who could unlock its true potential. That person is you." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What does that even mean? What do you want from me?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood, moving across the room with the same grace she always had, her movements fluid and deliberate. The air seemed to shift around her, like the very space bending to her will. "I can't tell you everything just yet," she said, her voice echoing softly in the room. "But know this, the world you know is only a fraction of what exists. There are things, beings, beyond your understanding. And your arrival here, it wasn't just a coincidence. You were chosen. The room was silent for a long moment, the hum of the building the only sound left. Marcus felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, like a puzzle whose pieces were scattered just out of reach. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain: his life had just become part of something far bigger than he could have imagined. As Zyra turned to leave, her violet eyes met his one last time, filled with an unreadable expression. "Rest, Marcus," she said softly. "Tomorrow, you will begin to understand." And with that, she was gone, leaving Marcus alone in the strange, shifting apartment, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on his chest. The heart of the storm. The apartment seemed to pulse with energy as Zyra closed the door behind her, the soft hum of the building growing louder in the silence that followed. Marcus could feel her presence in the room now, not just physically, but in a way that was almost overwhelming. It was as if she were the center of everything he had yet to understand about her and this place. Zyra stopped just in front of him, her eyes never leaving his. "You're asking the wrong questions, Marcus," she said softly, her voice low and steady. "The truth is far more complicated than you realize." Marcus swallowed, his heart racing. He had a feeling he knew where this conversation was heading, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. But the mystery, the unspoken weight of it all, pulled him in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaky. "What truth? What are you hiding from me?" For a moment, Zyra didn't respond. Instead, she stepped closer, and Marcus could feel the heat of her presence, almost like a force field around her. She reached out, not touching him, but the air between them seemed to shimmer, as if the very space around her was bending in ways that defied logic. Then, in one fluid motion, she took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice like a whisper carried by the wind. "I am not like you, Marcus. I am not even from your world. And this place," she gestured around the room, "is not just an apartment. It's a nexus, a meeting point between many realities, many dimensions, and I have been waiting for you." Marcus's pulse quickened, his mind reeling. "What do you mean, waiting for me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Zyra closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, her face softened. "I have been searching for a partner," she said. "Someone who can understand what I am. Someone who can bear the weight of what I carry." Her voice cracked slightly, as if the words themselves were painful to speak. "I've been alone for so long, trapped in my own world, my own cycle. And now you're here, Marcus. But the question is, are you ready to face what that means?" Marcus stood frozen, his thoughts racing. He had never believed in anything beyond the ordinary. But this was something out of a science fiction novel. A woman from another dimension, a living apartment that could bend space, and a purpose so strange and foreign that it felt like the floor beneath his feet might vanish at any moment. "I don't understand," Marcus admitted, his voice tight with confusion. How could I help you with all of this? I'm just a guy trying to survive. I don't know what you mean by partner. I don't even know if I'm ready to." "You are ready," she interrupted, her voice firm. But there was a flicker of something deeper beneath her words, something almost desperate. "You don't have to know everything, Marcus. You don't need to understand it all right now. But I've waited so long for someone who could stand with me, someone who wouldn't judge me for what I am, someone who could see beyond their own limitations and help me carry what's been forced upon me." Zyra's gaze was piercing now, her violet eyes shimmering with a mixture of vulnerability and power. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Marcus's arm, light, barely touching, but it felt like a current of energy coursing through him. The room seemed to pulse with a low, melodic hum in response. "I need you, Marcus," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of isolation. "Not just as a tenant, not just as a human. I need you to be part of something greater. But you must understand, being with me means stepping into a world of danger, of choices that may cost you everything." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. For the first time since he had entered the strange building, the fear he'd been suppressing bubbled to the surface. The consequences of accepting Zyra's offer were unclear, but there was something undeniable in the pull between them. Something that made it impossible for him to walk away, even though every instinct screamed at him to run. "I don't know if I can handle it," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just one person. I don't know how to fight these forces you're talking about." Zyra's smile was sad but understanding. "You're not alone, Marcus. I've been waiting for you for a reason. Together, we can face whatever is coming." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But know this, once you step forward, there is no going back. The life you knew will be gone. And the choices we make will determine not just our fates, but the fate of many others." Marcus's heart pounded as the weight of her words settled into him like a heavy stone. There was no turning back. Not now. But even as the doubt gnawed at him, another part of him, the part that had been struggling to survive, knew this was his chance to be part of something greater than he had ever imagined. The question was no longer whether he was ready, but whether he was willing to take the leap into the unknown, and what kind of man he would become on the other side. And in that moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The truth unveiled. Zyra's gaze softened, but there was an unshakable intensity in the air around them. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest, as if his very blood was trembling in response to the words that were about to break the stillness between them. He couldn't tell if he was about to learn something that would tear his world apart or something that could set him free. But he knew this moment would change everything. "I have been searching for a long time, Marcus," Zyra said quietly, her voice almost a whisper, as though she were speaking the truth she had never spoken aloud before. "Not just for companionship, not just for a partner, but for someone who could understand the true nature of this place." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy between them. "Someone who could feel the currents of this world, as I do." Marcus was silent, his thoughts spinning. Was she talking about the apartment? About him? The connection he had felt ever since he'd moved in, the strange resonance he sensed when Zyra was near, was this it? "You see, Marcus," she continued, taking a step closer until they were almost within touching distance, "this building, it is not just a place for rent. It is a living, breathing entity, a link between the vast, uncharted realms that exist beyond your understanding. And we are its caretakers. My species, we exist to maintain the balance between these worlds." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to absorb her words. "But you said you were searching. Searching for what?" Zyra's eyes glowed brighter now, as though some invisible force was coming alive inside her. "I've waited centuries, Marcus. Centuries to find someone capable of unlocking the potential of this nexus, someone who could bond with it, who could see what is hidden beneath its surface. Someone like you." He blinked, confusion mixing with fear. "Me? But I'm just a human. I'm broke, lost, and out of options. Why would you choose me?" Zyra's smile was soft but tinged with sorrow. "Because you're not just any human. You are the one the Nexus has been waiting for. The moment you stepped through that door, the building recognized you. It knew you were the key." Marcus could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, but there was something else, something deep inside him stirring. A sense of understanding, an awakening. His whole life had been leading him to this moment. The uncertainty, the isolation, the endless searching, all of it felt like it had been preparing him for what Zyra had just revealed. "But why me? I don't understand." Marcus's voice wavered, his disbelief palpable. "Why would a building, a nexus, care about me?" Zyra took another step forward, her presence almost magnetic now. "Because, Marcus, there is a power within you, the same power that flows through the nexus itself. You are part of the link. You were born from worlds beyond your own, just as I was, and only together can we unlock the true potential of this place." Marcus's mind raced. Could it be true? Could he really be connected to something greater than the life he'd always known? He felt a sudden surge of energy, almost as though the very air around him was thickening, shifting, responding to his emotions. Zira's eyes locked with his, her expression full of longing and something deeper, more urgent. "I have waited, Marcus, because the fate of this nexus is tied to both of us. The balance of realities, of countless worlds, rests on what happens next, and I cannot do it alone." 1,000 questions swirled in Marcus's mind, but one truth began to settle in his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel lost. He didn't feel alone. He felt connected. To Zira, to the apartment, to the unknown, and to something larger than himself. He took a deep breath, his fear melting away, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. "So what do we do now?" Zira smiled, the sadness in her eyes lifting, replaced by a spark of hope. "Now," she said softly, "we embrace the truth. Together, you and I." And in that moment, Marcus understood. This wasn't just a building. It wasn't just an apartment. It was the beginning of something new, something extraordinary. As Zira extended her hand toward him, the apartment hummed louder, the walls shifting in response, as if the building itself was acknowledging the bond they shared. Marcus reached out, and the instant his hand touched hers, the world around them seemed to dissolve, reality bending, folding, and reshaping. The truth had been unveiled, and the journey of discovery was only just beginning.